Could you please welcome a man that needs no introduction, Mr. Michael Leunig. Do you get nervous too, Michael, at the start of these things?
No, I don't.
You don't?
So I'll probably be boring.
You're just being contrary. For those who don't know, 4.5 years ago when Mark, who's principal of Salesian, asked me to set up this Twilight school, he kind of said, we've got this building, and he showed me the building. I thought it was the building, the gatehouse. And he said, do you think you can do something, Bruno? And I said, I think I can. And that was the job interview, and it's kind of grown into this. So I sat in my office for about 3 weeks, of course, and nothing was happening. And people going, well, come on, what are you doing? What's this Twilight school about? So I wrote to Michael Leunig and Alice Pung. I said, you need to come out. I need someone to draw attention to this. And he kindly did. And from little things, big things grow, which is a great... Michael Leunig, you are universally loved, but the caveat to that is I know you get yourself into lots of hot water too. Yeah. My personal opinion of you is that I think that you've been the solitary kind of opposition party for the last 40 years. And I don't often gush over my guests, but I just want to say that I do admire you deeply. Yeah, so I just wanted to get that.
Yes, the late John Clark paid me a very lovely compliment. He said, isn't it good in publishing Michael Leunig, The Age publishes its antidote. So I was touched by that.
John Clark was in this very room about 8 months before he died too, and
he was where?
Yeah, in this very room, and we interviewed him here as well. And
yeah,
he said of you, Michael. He said Michael Leunig is not just a great artist and cartoonist, but he said he's a beautiful writer within those cartoons as well. And I've been reading your beautiful rhyming couplets where you've talked about the most amazing things, and the breadth of them is amazing. Michael, when did you start doodling? When did you start going, there's something in me that needs to express this in that wiggly, curvaceous, life-affirming kind of way?
Well, it starts in early childhood, as it probably did with you, Bruno, and then there's an interrupted period when you're told you can't draw properly.
Who told you that?
Well, that was the art sort of education that happened in state schools back then, and you had to draw like a photocopier a bit and all that sort of thing, and that was okay. I enjoyed my drawing, but and then all the important people were more literary. You know, when I became of university age, but I was not there, it seemed like the whole world was very clever compared to me. I mean, all my friends went on to university and became more literary, and there was a sort of a high sort of echelon of people who seemed to hang around student pubs, and they seemed to know something.
Did that get you down?
Not necessarily, but I felt there was no point being in that. I couldn't compete with such magnificence, you know, and that was true, and it was an outsider view, because I had, as I've said before, a very kind of working class background. There was no cultural idea in my family of art or literature, and we didn't have arts festivals or writers' festivals back then. So I met all these people who had come from families which were more cultured, you would say, and they spoke more eloquently than I, etc. So I guess my drawing was a way of being seen. It's like a kid who plays music. He or she, they busk and they get seen, and then they get asked to do it again, and there's no proper way into it. There's no way one learns how to be a cartoonist. So you just start in a fumbling way and find your way of drawing. And
but at some point, someone in the newspaper, like you did your first cartoons for for the now defunct, well, it's been defunct for 45 years, Newsday, didn't you, at the time?
Yes, yes.
How did you get into that?
Oh, just luck.
Really?
Well, I was doing things for, these underground little magazines, anti-war type of things, protest pamphlets, and I would do these cartoons. And nobody much was doing cartoons except the proper cartoonists in the big newspapers. So there was this, it was the 60s, the 1960s, and that was a time of creativity and have a go, make it yourself. So I was doing it, and then the Age started this newspaper. They heard that there was this kid who was drawing cartoons which were political, and they said to me, look, I had dinner with the editor, or lunch, I mean, and I didn't know these people. This was sort of a whole new world. And they said, look, could you do 6 a week? Six. So I said, yeah, no problem. I didn't have a clue. And so the deadline was 9:30 in the morning. It was a daily paper, and I had to get in early, and so you just have to do it. So bravado, foolishness, whatever, all those qualities. And you had to, I wanted to communicate to the world, as do a lot of people when they're young, particularly. They want to make music, make something, offer it.
And you're now 73.
Yeah.
You still, that desire to still communicate, to still want to make it.
Yeah.
Is it diminishing a bit? Have you been whacked too many times now by the establishment?
I have been whacked a lot. And like this week, I wrote a very careful and considered column, 1,000 words. It took me a long time to say it carefully and thoroughly and to choose my words. I submitted it, as it was expected, and the Age refused to publish it. And
did they tell you why?
Yes, they told me fibs, I think, and they said it had a few legal problems in it. And it didn't. I've been around journalism long enough to know when it's legal or not. And also the old system would be a sub-editor would ring you and say, look, we've got a problem with this sentence, can you change it just now? Yeah, no problem. But none of that happened. So I heard Helen mentioning the first stone and the hostility that she endured by people calling themselves feminists at the time. And it's a word. What does that mean anymore? I'm not sure. There are so many versions of this, and some of them are not entirely friendly. And so I touched on this sort of what I think is a sadness emerging between males and females at certain levels, and a kind of a slander against men in general, I feel. Now, I was just reporting, because I'm listening to males, I'm listening to my young sons, I'm listening to older men, and I'm listening to women too, who agree with me, that this is a very ticklish subject, and to touch on this is to invite, hell. And so I invited a little bit of hell. And I wasn't provocative. I was extremely well balanced, I think. And I did wonder in it about the factor of male violence, like the wars, the school shootings in America, the things everywhere. We know about it. And I gave some ideas about it. So I'm very well balanced. But it's not good content at the moment to have a complex philosophical inquiry. It's just not clickable, And I think media or newspapers are increasingly modelled gradually, unconsciously on social media, I think. The superficiality, etc., the sort of good, bad, them, us, etc., quick hits. And so I've had a lot of that sort of thing, and after a while,
What does it do to you? Does it
Oh,
Does this make you gun shy? Do you go, I'm going to pull my head in, I'm tired of getting this reaction? Or does it kind of fire you up and going, no, I need to keep expressing these things that are dear to my consciousness?
And to my conscience, yeah. And so, well, a bit of both, Bruno. You get a knock and you think, oh, I think I've had enough of this. And then you have a good sleep and a good meal and a glass of wine, and a couple of days pass and you start thinking, and it grows you up a bit too, you see. You continue to grow up, I think, and think, all right, I can't just let this drop, and I'm not going to pursue it like tenaciously neither. I'm not going to wear myself out on it, but I'll learn something and maybe I can address this differently.
You're a painter, you're a cartoonist, you use that beautiful square and you've got your characters and your symbols that have become part of who you are, and they give you a great source of nourishment too. Yeah. And you're a writer as well. Do you have a sense of when you want to use those different art forms to express different things? When do you go to the long essay? When do you do the common prayer? When do you say this needs to be drawn? How do you decide those things, Michael?
Oh, it's just very whimsical in that, I do it on a whim. Or I feel like that, or I feel like this. It's like you and your food or wine. You say, I want a sandwich, or I want this. It's like a sensuality. All those forms of expression are very sensual to me, and they're very, they're a pleasure and a struggle, of course, a massive struggle. But you want to engage it, and I think writing is very beautiful, and that brings on something in me. And then I want my hands to pick up a brush and colour, and the material and the primal quality of painting and making an image, which is like music. You see, it's similar to the idea of making music.
And you have no idea what's going to come from the end of that brush.
Well, in some ways that's right. I mean, you set out with a kind of an idea of something more or less, or just a starting point, and then that's the lovely thing about materials and a brush. You're not in total control. Well, not the painting I do. Sort of things happen, and you just got to be alert to what's happening. And it's like a child painting. You watch a child make a chalk drawing on a footpath outside a cafe while mum and dad are inside having a coffee, and children draw the most beautiful things, and they're free and spontaneous and flowing, and I'm awestruck by what rolls off onto that thing. There's something just flows out of them onto it, and to experience that is lovely. And to do that is worthwhile for me. Or draw, or it's just enjoying the whole lot. And it's a problem too, Bruno, because you don't become identified with one thing in particular. You sort of do a bit of this and a bit of that, and you're sort of an all-rounder, but not achieving anything extraordinarily well. You don't become, you don't achieve that sort of recognition in some area. Not that that matters, I guess. It's strange.
Would you like to think, Michael, that the work you do, that at some point has the capacity, and I know you don't set out to do that, and maybe one shouldn't set out to do that, but do you think it has the capacity to actually shift people from whatever entrenched position they were in? Have you known people to come and say, I have rethought that because of your drawing or your cartoon or your prayer or your Vasco pajama curly letter or whatever?
Well, you can't intend that, but I recall when I was a child, I'll keep referring back to childhood a lot probably in the course of this, but how affected I was to read or to hear an Oscar Wilde story like The Happy Prince, and I used to cry because the little swallow, would die and all that. And so I was tremendously affected, and I was affected by the music I heard, And during the 60s, there was a lot of outpouring, so you're affected, and it's kind of eros. It's eros. And
What's eros?
Eros, erotic, life force, the urge to life, vitality. And I think these things affected me greatly. And in this way...
And they're still affecting you?
Yes, and so you say, oh, I want to be part of that ecosystem of offering something, and no particular ambition, but you want to add into that ecosystem of eros, which we would call art, perhaps. Perhaps it's called art. I didn't grow up with the idea of art. And but eventually you say, oh, so that's what's happening. It's this soulful kind of creativity which is shared and offered and exchanged, and it like here we have little pictures on the wall, or it's in every shape or form, it's everywhere, and we take it for granted. Music, and you couldn't dance with that, Bruno, and it's sort of...
I reckon I could, but anyway.
Yeah,
Michael, here you are in your early 70s, and you're using words like eros and sensuality and childhood and kind of vulnerability. This is not the language of the commentariat that talks about our culture. You're standing very much in a different place to them, aren't you? And deliberately so, I'm guessing.
Well, I'm not so highly conscious of it. I'm doing what comes natural to me, essentially. But I am aware that the alleged commentariat or a lot of the scholarly class or the critics, I've always had a bit of problem, as all artists have, with the scholars who become very brain-ridden or something, and while respecting scholarship, etc., but that it lacks that sensuality somewhere. It gets dry, I guess, and soon they're the people who are running the art world and running the galleries, and they're the curators, and the art world is in terrible state, I think, the official art world. I mean, you can't stop people creating art, but these sort of, big galleries, and who decides what we will see and what we'll revere and what big blockbuster shows will be. I think it's just... No.
You're very fond of the philosopher Lao Tzu, who says real art doesn't look like art.
Yeah, I think there's so much truth in that.
Expand on that a bit.
Well, painting lately has become so insecure and so anal. It's like photorealist, like stressed out copying, and that's growing and growing. The what are the portrait prizes?
Archibald.
Archibald, yeah. I mean, yeah, you see some lovely paintings, but these tight. Why not just take a photo of someone? And I don't get it anymore. And so these are the revered things, and it's just a personal taste. I can't. But I don't have much faith in the great art. If I see the National Gallery of Victoria magazine, I get... I get like that. Yeah, I'm all right. I don't do anything bad.
You don't go and throw rocks at the art gallery? Or
I don't take great comfort in the art world, to be quite frank. Although
and you don't seem to want to be in it either, do you?
Well, it's full of appalling people. And so is the world. I mean, I'm having a hard go of it at the moment in the world. I wake up and I don't like the world a lot sometimes. I don't like the world we're living in. And I find a lot of people, I hear a little murmur in the crowd, and I hear that in conversation, and I think there's something going on here. What people feeling alienated and disgusted with their world, their political world, the commercial world, a lot that's going on, and we are always asked to be, oh, come on, cheer up, it's okay. You're just down in the dumps, or you're depressed or something. I think, yeah, well, I don't think I am, like permanently or...
But sometimes you have been.
Well, if I drive to Sunbury, you see, and I have to come through this landscape I don't recognise anymore because I have early memories, and I see these great, the fast food people and the types of massive houses people live in, and the big shopping malls, and that whole thing that's rolling over the world, and it hurts me somewhere, and I know I shouldn't. I should be like Lao Tzu and accept, but I find it hard to be at peace with it, and I don't like myself for this, but it does bother me a bit,
And the commentary will be saying, Michael Leunig, harden up, wouldn't they?
Yes, there is that.
You're a bleeding left liberal,
something like this.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be like cranky or something. You was in the face of these things, one wants to make funny little poems or rhyming couplets, which proper poets don't do. There's this sense of, that's a proper poet, you're not a poet. Well, I don't care what I am. I'm just sort of saying, enjoying it, and if people like it, good. So that's the truth. But yeah, to come through a landscape, to return to my childhood suburb, as I did just yesterday.
Which is Footscray, East Melbourne?
No, well, I was born in East Melbourne, but that was just a moment in time. And no, I grew up in Footscray and a place called Maidstone, which nobody's ever heard of, and except Bird Facey was born there, who wrote A Fortunate Life. So, but so I was taken there, and the grief, High Point shopping. That was a huge quarry, a basalt quarry when I was a boy, and I used to play in it, and etc. And the ammunition factory at the end of my street, where I grew up to the sound of machine guns firing, and I thought that's normal, and the sound of great explosions coming from the quarries. So I lived in a war zone, and I was as happy as a bird. All gone. And, these endless apartments and this, whatever. So I don't belong.
But you've gone and also pursued a life on a farm in southeastern kind of Victoria, haven't you?
Northeast Victoria. I lived for 20 years. The farm is still there, and I'm in Melbourne mostly now because of.
But what was that move about? Was that about going?
That was offspring wanting a university education, and you come down, and it's a bit hard going, but it's okay. And, but the bush, I love the bush, and I still go there, and I've had many adventures and near-death experiences in the bush.
Are you a solitary wanderer in the bush, or do
you
take
that.
A friend and yak your head off? What does the bush do for you?
Well, there's a lot of labour there. You have to work, and I like that. That was my way of keeping connected and, making a fence or, all the things you do, you have to do. Trees fall on the road, it's pretty remote, etc. So you've got to get the chainsaw out and all that sort of thing. And that was an old, a working class background. I don't know whether people use that terminology anymore, but for a male, and my father was a slaughterman. I too worked in the meatworks, and I had that. That was my world of this sort of work. I worked in factories, and I had to kill cattle, Bruno, and I didn't volunteer for that. I was a labourer in the meatworks, and so I'd be put on to kill cattle just after lunch, and so I would. So I had that in my background, which a lot of my friends who I later met did not have in their background. And it's not a defining characteristic, but it has an influence on you.
the escaping from the city and living in the bush was...
Well, relating to the sort of people there, I think, sorry, I cut across you there. Yeah, I think the people I found there, you know, I had to be in the fire brigade. So you get on a fire truck and you're not with people out of your address book, you're on the fire truck with who turns up. And the guys of all kinds of persuasions. And that suits me because, you know, these are not educated people in the main. They're farmers and all comers, but that suits me. I like the company of the rough and the ready and all your people tonight. I mean,
you were very debonair. They've scrubbed up for you, Michael.
No, I'm not being an inverted snob. It just was my cultural background.
Sure.
A lot of males were labourers and factory workers, largely, or tradie type people.
And you speak very fondly of them in some of your essays in the lot, and your father, and almost their dialect or their way.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the dialect was wonderful.
Tell us about their dialect, what their language.
Well, the turns of phrase, which have sort of faded a bit now, I think. A lot of funny, old, wicked ways of talking. And
I like wicked. Tell me more.
there was a rawness of language which was very functional but very funny. There was humour woven into it. And it wasn't clever, writerly language. I mean, sometimes I have a bit of trouble with a lot of contemporary writing. It's very kind of cleverly constructed and poetic in some way, but sometimes I don't relate to it. When it's done well, it's beautiful. I just adore Helen's writing, always have, etc. And so I don't think it's a snootiness. It interests me, a statistic I heard, that only 10% of books that are purchased are read through to the end. 10% with some estimation. I reckon it mightn't be that low, but it mightn't be much higher. I don't know. There's a lot of books sitting around in houses. I've started a few books and I get to chapter 3 and I think, I can't go on with that.
I've read all yours right through many times, Michael, I must say.
Well, that makes up for it, yeah, thank you.
Michael, you've put the word soul back into the lexicon of humanity. You talk a lot about the ecosystem of the soul, and you almost compare the frailty of nature and how we became aware that what we were doing to our planet. And you're going, we need to almost be aware of the soul and the things that we pump into it that are going to wreck that soulful ecosystem. Is that a good summation of kind of...
Yeah, I think so, Bruno. And it was this, like I often refer to Rachel Carson, who wrote that book, The Silent Spring, and that was the realisation that science wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. They were using this scientific product, DDT, and in agriculture, and slowly the rivers were dying and the things they couldn't anticipate, and then the birds were disappearing, and so the whole thing was dying, hence, the Silent Spring. And I couldn't help but make the comparison to our kind of ignorance of what we put into ourselves or our culture, and I'm not advocating censorship, but just the care for what we take in, because we are, as you know, a very consuming sort of people. We consume as whatever we can get our hands on culturally. There's a lot of consumption and having this experience or not just material things, but so many great concerts and all that, all lovely, all tempting. But what do we do when we saturate our inner life with so much? And it strikes me as interesting, when Mozart and Bach were writing their music, to hear a bit of Bach would be very rare and very special and very organic and live, the music and the resonance of that bow on that gut string, etc. Particular organic realities. Now you can pop Bach on the, CD, and you can have it 24/7, and you do have it 24/7 on ABC Classic FM. You can just have as much classical music as you like, and we just think we are richer now. This is better, but it's just my curious question. It's like Helen saying, it's interesting. It's not. I'm not taking a dogmatic position. I'm saying this interests me. What is happening when we can have so much of this peak experience and yet be so miserable too at the same time as a society at certain levels? I mean, it's a funny thing. What is happening? What is happening out there? How much misery is there? Do most men live lives of quiet desperation, as someone said? Or how well are we? And the question of sanity, that word, it's sort of a rough word, sanity, but it just means health. How sane is our world, and and do we care, or do we just flow along with it? And when I said I don't like I'm uneasy about a lot of the modern world, as are my offspring and their generation. I have an unease, and I think that's a human instinct,
What do your kids think about their dads talking about soul and sensuality and all those things? Do they go, you're from the hippie era, Dad, and the world's moved on? Or do they get it?
I have 3 boys and a girl. I have one boy who I can talk about these matters with in detail, in complex detail, the youngest boy, Felix. He loves to sit and talk very, deeply and seriously, and the others don't so much. They just don't. But that's no problem. They talk of other things. They're all different, and Bruno, I grew up thinking that a family is all cut from the same cloth, we're the same name. It took me a long time, too long, to understand that is not the case. And as Khalil Gibran said, we come through our parents, we are not of them. I'm inclined to subscribe to that. And there's a lot of unhappiness in learning that truth.
On Anzac Day, you'll have a cartoon where this little guy with this big bulbous nose, with his big eyes, looking out over this brownie landscape, and he's going, the weary gentleman looks up, and there laid out before him the entire elaborate and irrefutable argument against war.
Yes, and that's what he's looking out over, a landscape of nature, I suppose. Yes, well, I suppose you're opening up the idea of my, the position I've taken about militarism and war in my cartoons, which has caused me a lot of grief, I must say, and still continues. I created a cartoon recently on Anzac Day about medals.
The badges.
The badges. And of course, a lot of
shitstorm's going to come from that, Michael, don't you?
It's called predictable outrage, yeah. But well, I don't. Often I stumble into these things because it seems to me to be a worthy thing to offer, and I mistakenly imagine that a lot of people can see that. That there's a point in this, and I'm not being destructive. I'm trying to illuminate or present the other side of the coin, as someone said, the other side of the medal. I am not besmirching, medals as such, but medals carry other feelings, and I know this because I remember the men who came back from the World War II, these my uncles and people, and I knew Russians who'd been in Stalingrad and etc. And it's clear that it's clear that it's a terrible thing. That's nothing new to say that. But when the Iraq War was developing, when it was looming to be the case, and we all held our breath and thought, I hope this doesn't happen. And you hear the drums beating, and certain journalists were coming forward to say it's got to happen and this is why. And I just...
And they were on your newspaper, a lot of those editorial comments.
They
too,
were.
weren't
They actually were. And I was surprised. In times of war, it unleashes stuff that's dormant in your culture. And so I received a lot of very menacing, threatening, angry letters from people just because I didn't revere the whole, the case for war. And so that's quite a trauma. Just the deluge that comes at you. And so where's this coming from? And I suddenly realised there's a lot of racism and a lot of sadism dormant in us good Aussie folk. So, oh no, we're not sadistic, but no, not as a culture, but as human beings, there's a level of cruelty in people which is not evident in normal day-to-day life, but given a certain circumstance, it comes forward. And then to get a chance to feel the pointy end of that is quite a privilege in a way. So illusions go missing. And so I've had a lot of.
How do you balance the need to do that? And I would say, Michael, good on you, and you stir something deep in me as one of your readers. But how do you then balance that with saying, I need to find my own calm, my own peace, my own way of getting on with the world as well? And
well,
is it difficult?
I have Mr. Curly, and I create these different characters, and there's a lot of joy going on and childlike stuff, infantile work, and I love infantile work too. It can be part of the spectrum of who every person in this room has, hopefully, some innocence left, which I call mature innocence. And I think, are we to throw that away?
No.
Are we to not feel sorrow and sadness seeing one person be cruel to another? No, we must feel it. And so we turn to nature, to art, to music, to each other, to your glass of wine. And we can do that, and we keep looking at the dark and the dirty. Well, that's my job, Bruno. That's the job description.
But it's a job that you've taken upon yourself to do, isn't it, as well?
Well,
or is that what the cartoonist tradition has always wanted cartoonists to do?
The voice of the permanent opposition, and it's not easy sometimes because you're not marching with the regiment, and it's sort of the naysayer, the dissenter, and that's the job, and so it's really just a professional kind of job. But so I think it's this balance, Bruno, and always finding delight also in the eternal, the creatures, the creaturely aspect of us all, trying to awaken people to in a psychoanalytic way, to awaken. That's what the artist does, to express what is repressed. And in the hope that you endure, you affirm to people it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel pity or anger within, etc. These are just natural. It's trying to be whole, I suppose, and it's just an instinct to do that.
Just going back to that cartoon of the man looking over those beautiful rolling hills,
Yes.
and you go, this is the argument against war.
Yes.
I've read Erich Fromm, I've read Karl Marx. I'm not bragging about that, but I'm saying
Yes.
I've followed the convoluted cerebral arguments. Then I look at your cartoon and it cuts through,
Okay.
and it melts something, and something goes, that is so self-evidently true. That's the beauty, isn't it? Isn't that what art can do? That little space, that drawing?
Yeah, but how does that happen? I don't know.
Okay.
Because I find, where does that cartoon come from? For instance, I don't say, like I wake up in the night and say, that's a good idea. I'll just go and transcribe it onto the paper. It never works, it rarely works like that for me. But that is found in the struggle towards finding something, like to get up and you feel the earth, you feel what is in the world, the zeitgeist, if you think, or you imagine you do. You feel like you're part of your people, your culture. We all do somewhat, and you got an ear to the ground, or you feel for what people are talking and feeling about. And they mightn't be talking about it, but you can see it in their faces almost. And so you've got to be conscious. It's a delusional, it's a creative delusion, I guess, for a cartoonist. You've got to feel what matters today, and what is not being said, or that is worth saying. And there's an old principle which is a bit Taoist. When everybody is laughing, be serious. When everybody is serious, find the humour. So it's always being a bit the other, you know. The loner is there and the crowd is here, and etc. And knowing when it's time to enjoy the crowd. So,
one of your prayers is almost about that, isn't it? You know, give me rain when I'm expecting sunshine. Give me this when I'm expecting that. You know, that being kind of tossed around and not getting the very thing you think you want or whatever.
I think that's important to say that you start out with what you might call an egotistical idea, like a brainy idea, a smart line, a clever, witty line. And you say, oh, that's too easy. It's just clever, Dick, you know. And I want something else. I want to find something. This is just a starting point, that idea. And so you sit down, and there's your paper, and you try and transcribe the idea, but it dies in them. It doesn't work if you just transcribe from this. For me, this is my process. My process when it's working well. And then let's say you get lost. I've explained this before many times. When I'm working well, I start out somewhere, but then soon it's not working, and then I get lost, and then I become distressed, and kind of like I can't do that. As I heard Helen say it, I can't do this, and this feeling of being lost and hopeless, and infantile and pathetic, and why did I ever think I could do this? And meanwhile, the clock is ticking to deadline, and you think, oh God, I've got to do something. And so the pressure comes on, and then, you know, you've actually sort of destroyed your own self-esteem, in a sense. And you feel hopeless, and you think everyone else is clever, everyone else knows how to do smart cartoons, everyone else knows how to write well, but I don't. What a fraud or something. And then you have that feeling. No one knows if someone's walking by my desk. I'm not weeping or anything, but then you go, if you just stay in that space of wanting to, just this desire. It's desire to want to find something and create something, and it's a lot to do with desire and willingness and the stamina to stay there and the daring to stay there. There's a lot of daring, and eventually, you know, and then the mind starts working differently then, because guess what's happened? You've stripped away your ego substantially. I think it's something like that. You don't have this ego view of the clever fellow anymore. You're the floundering fool, but you're still keen, and if you work and start playing with your ideas, thinking differently, because you're just raw. And I think the raw mind, which is sincere and yearning to make a new thing, can find it. I think anyone can do this. Whatever it is they're trying to do, if you just stay there And then soon enough, a little, as if by magic, a little thing starts to appear. The start, it's the fertile thing, and it starts to grow, and then you kick in and you engage it, and you're just off in a different world then, and you're creating, and you don't care what other creation's about, what the great poets or the great people writing in your culture are writing. It doesn't matter. You're not comparing yourself to anybody. You're just being yourself, and you know. I'm labouring this a bit, but you know there's a sincerity and a heartfelt. A soul is working in it. So sometimes then, Bruno, not always.
So how do we get...
Not often.
How do we find soul again, Michael? And I know you would go, but my job is not to instruct. My job is not to tell you this is the way to do it. This is not...
Yeah.
But it's important, isn't it? If the soul is in the state you describe...
Well, I think this is an eternal... This has been going on since time began, hasn't it? Humans struggling to become who they truly are, or know themselves and confess their truth to themselves and sort of enjoy it somehow. I mean, one has to have an idea that the inner life matters, and it is a struggle, and it's a worthy struggle, and it's an astonishingly beautiful thing, and it's the great consolation in the end, because what else have you got? I mean, you've got your friends and the flowers in the garden and your cat, but
Always the cat.
or whatever. Pardon? The teapot. Well, a few material goods. Yeah, that's right. That's true. But in the end, it's the most sustainable thing. And it's our genius. We all have this genius in us. We do. I don't believe that genius is an elitist thing. I think it's just daring to know of your astonishing gift. It's either dormant or sometimes it's working, and I don't know. I don't know whether I'm being too idealistic there, but it seems to me if you care enough for the idea of your unique suffering, joyous self, and you see its value with others and in the way you make your life, it will. You give it a little bit of life, and you talk to it sort of in your thoughts, and you see it in others. You see the person's.
And in the stranger too? You're big on meeting the stranger, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely, because they turn up all the time, don't they? and what Helen was saying about the eye contact, I miss it terribly. I engage in it as much as possible. I live near an old people's home. Most of the residents are younger than me, it seems, but a lot of them are women, it seems. I think blokes fall off the twig early or something. But look, there's Queen's Parade is full of them, and they all want to talk about something. That's fantastic, and you live and learn. I love it. And better than talking to newspaper editors, I tell you.
So you're in the newspaper, but you're not of the newspaper, I sense. That's true. And a lot of us do that. We work in institutions that we go, I don't care for its driving principles and that, but you kind of work your way in trying to do your own peculiar thing in your own way.
Well, that was the role of the cartoonist. It was a recognised, respected role. This guy is the outsider. He or she, leave them alone, they're mad, but they do think this funny stuff or this odd stuff. It's another perspective. And that's the value of it. It's a peculiar. It doesn't belong. It's sort of. Sorry.
They communicate and they get us readers.
Yeah, something like that. But it's once it was respected. I don't think it's being respected as much anymore. There's more conformity. This is our policy of the paper. You march with the regiment, as I keep saying. You're being a spoiler. This is increasingly I've watched this, and there's sort of policy, and we know about this term called political correctness, and it's a vexed question, but I watch this kind of crushing in of, creative ideas are feral by nature. They're inappropriate. If I was appropriate, I would produce nothing. I mean,
So we're all going to go marching to work and go, I'm going to act inappropriately today.
Well, that's delinquency.
That would be daring, wouldn't it?
Well, you see, what is inappropriate? It's when things come together that don't normally belong together, wouldn't they? You have an unusual way of describing something or something. Like when two things are inappropriately there. An unholy marriage, you would call this, wouldn't you? These old terms. I love to see things that don't belong together coming together. It's beautiful. It's a sort of chemistry. There would be no science if things were only appropriate. There'd be no art. So, and of course, I don't want people to be inappropriate in the way that, is antisocial and destructive, but just the principle of putting things together and mixing little things that don't normally come together. That's part of the joy of making it. Yeah.
Motoring news. You've got the little red curly car and the policeman's gone up to Mr. Curly and he's given him the breathalyzer.
Yeah.
Mr. Curly in his goat-assisted pedal car is asked by a police officer to blow into a tin whistle, whereupon it is discovered that he is driving under the influence of poetry. For this, he gains 10 merit points.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for that little red car all my life. When is it going to come? That is you at your playful, mischievous, frolicsome best, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Someone told me, as a result of that cartoon, someone told me a story about Brett Whiteley, and they said, back in the days when they couldn't test for cannabis on drivers, Brett was seen driving very weirdly across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and the policeman pulled him up and said, breathalyzed him. He said, "Look, you haven't been drinking. What are you on?" And he said, "I'm high on art, man." This was a very typically Brett Whiteley thing to say. Yeah, but the little red car.
Those characters, Curly, the teapot that Nia just talked about, all those symbols on that, you kind of love them, don't you? And they're now part of you in some way, aren't they?
Well, you have to draw with love. I assume anyone who writes anything worthwhile writes with love. I think so. You have to actually love it. And when you create a character, you put that little dot in exactly the right place in the eye, because you feel it. That's what it is for that person there you've just drawn. So there's a lot of, it's not science, it's just feeding it onto the paper. And there's a lot of love, I think, you'd call it love. The love a child has when it makes a sandcastle or something like that. Same sort of love.
We don't talk about love in the broader cultural conversation, do we?
We don't. I think we have a very narrow thing, and I think Eric Fromm points to this in The Art of Loving. This, the immense, how broad that word, what a vast thing it covers, and a politics made with love, a meal, a garden, one's work, this interview, whatever. There's a sense of love, and you ask me about, do I get nervous about a crowd? I don't, and the reason is, I think I've approached it, I love the people there because they've come to listen to me, and I think I love them in a sense, I do. And you think, I want to get out, I want to be with them, you see, so there's no... you think well of the people who are listening to you. And
will you have a dance with me later? Because I'd love to have a dance.
Yeah, maybe, Bruno, we'll see what happens.
There are only two feelings,
on the music.
Michael Leunig, love and fear. There are only two languages, love and fear.
Yeah.
Here we go. I mean, I read Eric Fromm on love, and I love what he said.
Yeah.
But I go, he's right.
He was?
You're right.
Yeah,
fear. What makes us fearful? What's that about? Haven't we evolved enough? Haven't we got enough collective wisdom to go, we should be barracking for the love side and not the fear side?
I think we have to fear some things, to survive. On a bushfire day up the bush and you see smoke, there's a little pang of fear, and that's for a good reason, obviously. But I don't know, we're talking about a neurotic fear, and I think we're riddled with it, are we not? There's a lot to be fearful of, I think. We drive our car, it interests me how we drive our car down a road at 100 kilometres an hour. Coming at us in the opposite direction is another car coming at 100. And, we're not that so far apart. So you just think there's normal, you're not fearful. But what does the soul think? What does, the eyes are the window of the soul. I don't want to sound fanatical about this, but is there a part of us that is living a very stressful and dangerous life, and we're sort of repressing it all the time, quite naturally, not consciously? We get used to it, we adapt, and adaptation can be a terrible thing. The things we can adapt to, and so I wondered about the level of stress and danger that we live with, and we just absorb it and integrate it. And then we have anxiety, non-specific, free-floating anxiety. I wonder, I don't have a firm theory, I do wonder, the speed at which we live, Bruno, is staggering. And getting back to love, I've said before, nothing can be loved at speed.
No, I remember that.
Yeah, love is a slow and steady kind of discipline, if you like. But and I think a society moving too fast doesn't make its railway tracks with love, or its roads, or its cars, possibly. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, but if you move too fast, you don't do it well. And yet we applaud speed and power.
Yeah. How many people say, I'm so busy, and you go, if I hear someone else tell me how busy they are, I'm going to throw it, whatever at them. Some questions from the floor. We've got to let Michael go pretty soon. Big loud voice.
Those people who criticised you when you were a teenager, where are they now?
Oh, they live in big, comfortable houses. No, you're talking about the critics who write letters. I don't know.
You're not worried either?
No, I don't know. We all have different fates, and I don't worry. I don't feel vengeful to people who
You don't look vengeful either.
I don't think I am.
No.
I don't think I understand when people are angry at me. I understand it. I've hurt them. I didn't mean to, but I hurt them. It's like when Bruno would stand on my feet while he's dancing with me.
That's how I learned to dance, actually, but that's a whole other story. Question from this side of the room? Yeah? Big loud voice.
Thank you. You talk about the collective consciousness, and you pick up a collective consciousness, and you express it by your means. Where do you think that comes from? And furthermore, do you get depressed or disillusioned, or do you lose faith with regards to that, when you see that it does not resonate with everyone?
How do I pick up that sense of the collective unconscious or conscious? And of course we don't think that there's any one sort of theme out there. Well, I don't know. I think we all do somewhat, do we? We feel things in our world if we are open to it. If I have that ability, I'm not sure why, except that I'm, once again, getting back to what Helen said, I'm interested. I open myself to it, I guess, and you learn to read the faces in the street, not explicitly, not exactly. You get feelings from everyone you meet or see, and people give off so much. You read the newspaper, there's a whole deluge of little subtle informations, and there's no calculation going on. It's just, as I say, it's intuitive, I guess, and maybe creatures are like that. a lot of animals can do this quite in uncanny ways, and they sense what is going on. And I'm not the only human to do that. But there's another part of your question, was there?
Do you get down?
Do I get depressed? I have my... it's momentary, I think. It doesn't... Or there'll be bad weeks when it's not like a disabling depression. It's more like, oh dear, the world. You know, who doesn't do that? And you get this kind of downhearted. But faith, one doesn't lose faith. You lose hope, but you don't lose faith. And I don't have many hopes for the human condition. I don't. I just really don't. I look, and it's, to me, it's a bit matter of accepting that now. I see the world population growing and growing and growing. I mean, people say, oh, it's always been like that. It hasn't always been like that. The world's never been so full of people. We have never had such technology. I can't see a happy ending. I really can't. But I don't go around with a vision of gloom neither. I think, look, we were just on the Titanic and we just keep, you know, enjoying ourselves, dancing, and
become quite a
anyway,
thing.
it just might be a phase in this planet's development. But I don't have a firm view. But I do accept for myself that it's probably going to get worse.
One more. Nia, you got a question? I'll come to you, yeah.
So, Michael, when you sit down and you've got a feeling about something and you're waiting for it to coalesce into an idea that you're going to sit down and speak to,
Yeah.
do you get impatient, or do you just keep to go on speaking and without the window, or, you know, after all this time, how do you manage waiting for an idea or a feeling to express itself?
Yeah, there's no light globe comes on. As I said, it's just work. Or not work, it's just play and yearning for it, loving when you see other people do it, whatever that is. If I listen to Bach, I say, wow, what is that, etc. And so you feel part of that ancient tradition of creating some lovely, what you think is a lovely thing and might be of value to another person, even if it's a child, or particularly if it's a child. A lot of my drawings end up with children. And they got these clever captions or something, but the children don't care. They love the big nose and the eye and the way the dog is and all that, and they get a lot from it. That's great. And the loveliest thing is when people who are very old see value in it. That's the loveliest compliment. And I must just, if I was time, I'll tell you, I was at the Noosa Writers Festival some years ago, and I was doing a talk like this, and then a very old woman stood up and she said, I'd like to ask a question. I said, yes. No, I'd like to make a statement, she said. I'd like to say thank you for all the wisdom you have offered us over the years. I said, oh, you know, thank you. And she explained she was 94, I think, 94, and that is deeply touching. And then people, you know, went like that, and then she said, no, but that's not what I want to say. She said, above that, I want to thank you for the humour. And that was very beautiful to me, because someone of that age, it was telling me something important, that above all this wisdom, above all this cleverness, there is this mystery called humour, and she valued that. That was the highest value. So that was something I really took on board, and I was very touched by. And I to this day, I wonder, what is this thing, this humour that my father had, that Bruno has, that we all have, and sometimes is under threat a bit at times, because by definition it is a little bit ambiguous all the time, and there's a lot of freedom within it. And, you know, I think if we talk about freedom, that's a freedom I think really matters, and that's where beautiful ideas can emerge and be transferred, but we've got to allow each other. A bit of inappropriate, just a little bit.
One last question, yeah. That's okay. Yeah.
One of your, and I've been looking at the comments for years and years and years, and I've used it in the classroom, and I actually teach at the school, and there's one comment that stands out for me every time I enter the school, and I walk down to Mazzarella, which is the year 9 campus down in the farm, is the one of the father and the son watching the television. And now there's a sunrise on the television, and there's a window next to it, and there's the same sunrise.
Yes.
And for me, something that I grapple with every day in the classroom, but in life, as you were saying, it's great, but we've actually met it, it's great, you may not remember, but you've met a lot of people who think it's great. Everyone are on their phones, and dealing with technology, and that youth are seeing the world through technology, and they're missing out. And when I walk up behind the street, walking down to Mazzarella, I say, get off your phones, look at the sheep. Look at the lamb and the paddock, you're missing out on what's around you. You know, and they're missing out. They're interpreting reality through technology.
Yes, it doesn't look good, but I always refer to the old Persian saying, which we must always know, and this too shall pass. I think that comforts me.
Could you please thank the irrepressible Michael Dancing Leunig?
Thank you, Bruno.